Hello, thank you for joining us at the Open RAN panel for Open 5G Con. We have a really good panel here today with us. Joining us, let me just introduce briefly first the panel members. Dr. Chih Lin, she's at China Mobile. She's also the co-chair of the Technical Steering Committee at ORAN. Then joining Dr. Chih Lin is Pål Grønsund. Pål is a senior researcher at Telenor. And some of the interesting areas that he works in is cognitive radio, spectrum trading. So hopefully we'll get into some of those interesting questions. So hi, Pål. Then we have, Thomas Sennhauser from Intel. Hi, Thomas. Thomas is actually from Singapore. He's based in Singapore at the moment, and he's joining us all the way from there. Thomas and I were actually on, I don't know if he remembers me, but we were on the same panel at the India Mobile Congress last year. So hello. Then we have Antti Romppanen from Nokia. He's the head of Cloud R&D. And Antti is responsible for Cloud RAN Solution at Nokia. Hi, Antti. And last but not the least, we have Amit Ghadge, who's the director of product management from, Parallel Wireless. And I don't know if Amit remembers me also, but we did have a overlapping time at Cisco when he was part of the ASR 5000 and 5500 team, and I was running some of the solutions there. So hi, Amit. Thank you for joining us. Really, we appreciate your time, ladies and gentlemen, for joining on this panel. We'll get started quick. So we want to discuss things like what's happening with Open RAN, how is it evolving, how's the RAN evolving overall, and how does the Open RAN fit into the RAN deployment, contexts that are going on today with the telcos? So first question I'm going to actually pose to, Pål, and then we'll have some of the other panelists also weigh in on this particular question. And then I'm going to go deeper into some of the questions with the telcos, as well as with Intel and some of our partners that you have on the panel. So Pål, you want to start off and see how do you see the evolution of RAN, and how does Open RAN fit into that?
Well, yeah, I think Open RAN, I mean, it's about standardizing the interface between the BBU and the RU, right? Leading to higher flexibility. So in one way that it's also allowing for separate vendors in this domain, and for the BBU and RU. And one of the effects of this is that it enables more innovation, right? Within deployments of the single BBU and RU. So you can have more innovation within the domains. And of course, another potential effect is, of course, lowered cost of the RAN deployments. So you have those effects from the kind of the disaggregation, right? And then on the other side, we also have the more virtualization side of it, the virtualization of the RAN. Just more efficient operations, potential power savings, and also more self-organizing network algorithms that can be realized. So you have those effects as well. So obviously, I mean, we see this as extremely important. We see it as an important evolution of the radio access network. So yeah, I mean, this would just be important.
So let me bring in now Antti from Nokia into this question. And Antti, there it is. Pål said it's important to standardize the interfaces between, BBU and RU. And if you're doing the split RAN architecture, maybe it's, also the mid-haul between DU and CU. What's been your experience in terms of that standardization work? And then actually what we'll do is we'll get Dr. Chih Lin to weigh in as well after you. So tell me your opinion and what you have seen so far.
Yeah, I think that the openness of the front haul interface as well as the mid haul, and later on also the management and for example the RAN intelligent controller. So that is a extremely important part of O-RAN, and I would stress O-RAN here instead of Open RAN, in that sense that we should look into really O-RAN compliant interfaces when we are thinking about, for example, RU and BBU interoperability. You can of course integrate multi-vendor RU and BBU just using, for example, vendor proprietary interfaces like CPRI or CPRI. But the openness, the big benefits and the advantages come from when vendors are actually really standard compliance. When we are talking about open front haul, then it's really 7-2X, and even though even in that aspect it's not necessarily simple as a plug and play, but at least then the effort that is done for integrating RU and BBU is something that can be replicated and helps a lot of different service providers instead of being just like a project-specific integration.
So, Dr. Chih Lin, is that what you had in mind when you originally started with Dr. Sachin, where and co-chaired the first committee 2 years ago in O-RAN? Is that what you really had in mind when you were creating this, or when you were talking about this right at the beginning?
Well, I think the distinguished panelists that has spoken so far had really got to the very key points of what's happening with the RAN ecosystem this day. But really, it's not 2 years ago. Actually, it's been kind of, the answer has been clear to us since, I would say, almost 9-10 years ago. Started from 2011. We already kind of saw the trends, both in terms of the economy of our ecosystem, our markets, and also in terms of the capability and trends of the technology. So we started very early talking about from 4G to 5G. We really see that we need to be able to be more efficient, to be more agile, and then open, and then more intelligent. But really, I think you can see today that when our global community are kind of moving into the 5G era with great passion, we also see both challenges and opportunities. So 5G, to be able to deliver the promise or to fulfill the promise that we are all hoping for, that is to enable and support diverse vertical industries, and to enable a healthy ecosystem transformation that's needed, and bring in innovative new entrants to join this brave new era. We need to have a system, especially in the RAN, to be able to deliver the resource and cost efficiency, and to be able to deliver that necessary agility in terms of the service and capabilities. And definitely embracing the open culture that address both open interfaces, open APIs, and even bringing in the open source software as well as the open reference design hardware. And this way, it will, like the other distinguished colleague had mentioned, be able to enable the mix and match new players, experts that has distinguishable hardware capability or software capability to all come in and deliver their value. And in addition, yes, indeed, when we launched the O-RAN 2 years ago, we had said the two keywords is open plus smart plus intelligence. So we are looking to bring in necessary embedded intelligence from both the management domain to control domain, all the way down to even the real-time physical layer. So there's a lot of interest in that happening, and I think we are all here, which is basically a testimony for that.
Thank you, Dr. Chih Lin. That was great. Let me actually get an opinion from Amit first, and then I'll actually come to you, Thomas, if you don't mind for a moment, right? Because you play a little bit of a catalyst role, but let me just get Amit's opinion too in the mix to say, hey, Amit, I mean, are you seeing what does Open RAN mean to you as parallel wireless? I know, I mean, parallel wireless is a relatively smaller player compared to the big giants of the radio, but you've had some success in the market, and looking at different generation of technologies, and now suddenly this whole open conversation comes into the picture. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, thanks, Azhar. So, yeah, I mean, this telecom industry in general has been going through a dramatic change. I mean, if I have to compare it, it would be, I mean, equivalent to the kind of change that data centers went through in 2000s, right? And operators are looking to move away from costly and proprietary solutions into solutions that are more open and virtualized and software based as such, right? And in addition, as distinguished panel earlier said, that have a broader vendor ecosystem as well, right? So, I mean, this is what is the situation, and I mean, the market has been earlier dominated by proprietary siloed solution, and which is what operators now want to move away from, and that's where Open RAN is coming into play with a movement which is about opening up the interfaces in order to reduce the cost, right? And that's where ORAN, which is playing a role of standardizing the interfaces, right? And TIP, which is driving in terms of creating a broader ecosystem of MNOs and vendors as such, right? And Open RAN is not just about CU separation, but and not just about the capex saving, but it is much more than, as earlier somebody said, that there is need for agility and innovation that it comes with it, right? And operators are looking for Open RAN solution not just for 5G or 4G, but in fact for all G, right? Today there are so many legacy networks, if you see, and operators want a solution which can address their current needs as well as going forward the future needs of 5G and all, right? And that's where an Open RAN solution which is targeting all these or covering all these aspects.
Okay. Now hold that thought if you don't mind, because we're going to get into some of the challenges associated with Open RAN and some of the other generations. So that's why I was saying just hold that thought for a moment. We'll get into it. Let me bring in, Thomas. Thomas, I know that Intel has played a role of a catalyst in enabling some of these conversations with vendors, as well as working very closely with some of the carriers. So what have you seen so far in the context of Open RAN? How does it fit in the context of RAN, and what's kind of the adoption there?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think we started very early, a few years ago already, with with the ORAN or with the Open RAN, and also with virtualization, because we saw it very similar. As Dr. Jim said before, 10 years ago when NFV and virtualization started in networking, that similar stuff will happen also on the RAN side. And I think all the comment, I think I can agree. I mean, most of the thing is really about, we want to build an open environment. I think that's really critical. Getting an open environment, building innovation is normally happening when you have an open environment and a better ecosystem which has more players in it. That's normally driving innovation. And from an Intel point of view, we drive that. We were really the catalyst, as you would say, between the operator and the partners we have, of course. And we see over the last I would say 18 months, it's a little bit an explosion, a super hype, I would call it, on the ORAN side, because now suddenly the big players starting to do RFP, RFQs, and even trials in the network. So now everybody is starting to have that discussion, and I think that's a little bit where we maybe later come into a little bit of the challenge on that side. Where we are from a ready to deploy things, and what is also needed, because on one side you can have open and flexibility, but it then also depends on your partner ecosystem, and when you have multiple vendor, it makes things on one side easier, but on the other side also a little bit more complex than when you have a single vendor who brings everything as a keystone solution to you. So I think we need also to adopt that, and in Asia, we see that also the operators who can drive that, the other operators who maybe are too early to do that. And then the last thing quick is, I think when we talk about 5G, very, very specific, I think the complexity is a little bit underestimated, because a lot of people who are not coming from the RAN side, they don't see that the architecture looks a little bit different. I mean, not on a high level, it looks the same. You have a BU, you have a DU. But when you look into the hardware, the architecture, software accelerator, hardware accelerator you need for a mass MIMO versus, different frequency is completely different. And I think with 5G, that's, an additional complexity which we see compared to a 4G environment.
Thank you, Thomas. Let me, in the interest of time, let me actually move to the two telcos that we have, Telenor and China Mobile, right? Briefly, this is a question to both of you, and whoever wants to go first can go first. What are some dependencies, or what have you seen so far in your context in terms of working with the O-RAN Alliance? And what are some success criteria that you would define, for example, in getting to implement Open RAN in your respective telco infrastructures? So maybe Dr. Chih Lin, you want to start first? Did we lose her? Okay. Are you there, Dr. Chih Lin? All right. Maybe while we recover her audio, let's go to Paul.
Yeah, I think some of the dependencies, I would say, a bit back to what I mentioned earlier. I mean, I'm stressing this, of course, for Open RAN or O-RAN, the interface between the BBU and the RU, it definitely needs to be there. That's one of the key things.
But Paul, are you really finding them to be open though?
Yeah, I mean, so they should be. It's important. They should be open, of course, and they are. But that we actually have interoperability between suppliers, supplier A with BBU and supplier B with the RU, for instance. So that needs to be. We need to see interoperability there, and we have seen some, but according to specifications, right, in O-RAN. That's one important thing. And then a second thing which we maybe have not talked too much about today is because we have O-RAN, and on the other side we also have the kind of the virtualization of the radio as well, right? With the VRAN, and then obviously we see a lot of uncertainties and different approaches to how to virtualize the BBU. Basically, what is the requirement on the underlying platform? Do you use x86 combined with FPGA, with the GPU, and Intel as an approach as well? So there are many approaches, and all of them are probably good, and there are pros and cons. But it's important that we land on some way of standard way of deploying it, because one BBU implementation will depend on some of the underlying platform capabilities. I think that's an important consideration as well.
Okay.
So those are two things that needs to be in place for the success, in my view, and more as well. I mean, we talked about the RIC, the interface to the RIC as well, where we need interoperability. So the specification work and interoperability and the ecosystem coming together for that is extremely important.
Okay, I think you raised some important points. Maybe I'll go to Dr. Lin this time and ask her what, in her opinion, are some of the dependencies for success, and what are the expectations that China Mobile has?
I think rather than talking about just one operator's point of view, I believe I can share more as I see the global operator communities kind of a pace today. And overall, I believe to get to the full-fledged O-RAN vision, it will take time. And I think for the next few years, you will see the coexistence of the traditional approach solution, which is a more vertically integrated solution, together with the open and intelligent, cloudified, disaggregated realization, but probably not all of a sudden end-to-end complete solutions. I believe we touched upon one of the most representative key interfaces, which is open front haul, where eCPRI or CPRI-based approaches are being fully standardized by the O-RAN community. Because we all know that in the past, these two interfaces really were kind of semi-closed interfaces. They didn't qualify as open interfaces, but that issue is being addressed by O-RAN community. And then in terms of the bringing virtualization and cloudification platform all the way from core network to RAN, so that we have an end-to-end cloud native infrastructure, that will also take time, because in the RAN, we know that the complexity of the processing and the latency constraints are very much more stringent than the rest of the network. So bringing the virtualization platform in terms of its consumption, its performance and cost, there are challenges, okay? We know how to get it to work, but how we can make it work cost effectively and fulfill all of its value promised, we still have work to do. So like the colleague had said here, bringing CPU together with accelerators, how will we be able to mix and match even in that level? Maybe different CPU-based platform with different type of accelerator that would include APJ, that will include GPU, that may also include some form of DSP. Those are still, I think, ongoing work that other communities working on. And that certainly O-RAN Alliance is delivering the necessary framework as well as some starting point of the key interfaces and APIs to achieve that. And then finally bring the intelligence to the RAN. We call it RAN Intelligent Controller, RIC, where we have actually partitioned into the non-real-time RIC, near real-time RIC, and eventually also the real-time pieces will come in. Both the framework, architecture, and the key interfaces, as well as the key apps in these domains are being specified and worked out by the Alliance. And in parallel, I think you are also aware there is it's a Linux Foundation, where all of the key components that provides the openness, provides the intelligence, provides the cloudification, are all being actively worked on. Actually,
Excellent.
The open source community of O-RAN was launched only, I think, a year and a half ago, or less than a year and a half ago. We are already working on the third release.
Excellent.
It's coming up at the end of the, I think, this year, the cherry release. So
thank you, Dr. Lin.
We are making great progress, taking great stride.
Thank you. No, that was very good. Thank you. I think you've actually answered a couple of my questions that I had on my mind. But let me go now to actually the two vendors and Intel in terms of what are they seeing as barriers in terms of building this particular strategy of Open RAN from a vendor point of view, from your product point of view. So Antti, maybe we'll start with you this time. to talk about some of the vendor context and what are you seeing as some of the challenges. Do you see the specifications as fully defined? Do you see them clear enough that they're implementable? What do you see?
I think that we are starting to have maturity on the specifications that we can, for example, start looking into really like standard-based interoperability between RU and BBU, for example. And we have been defining, for example, Nokia IoT, so Nokia interoperability profiles, which then helped actually to do this integration between different kind of vendors units. And I believe that brings actually a lot of value to the community. However, it is still not, like I mentioned earlier, it's not plug and play. So it requires testing and integration efforts. And of course, that's something that we needs to be seen, that how much service providers themselves want to take role in this kind of a integration, or how much then vendors like Nokia, for example, have a role in that. Of course, Nokia has been developing a lot of multi-vendor integration capabilities. So in that sense, we believe that those can really help the adoption and overcome the barriers on this compatibility. The other thing that I see as a potential obstacle is that there are not many service providers who can start kind of from a clean table, like a network from scratch. So all the capabilities that have been important in the legacy network are basically something that need to be transferred to the new O-RAN based network, and therefore, for example, in our base stations and in our radios, we have been developing the O-RAN interfaces as well as the vRAN or cloudified RAN capabilities in the same Nokia S-Scale base station software, so that it's not something where you actually need to have a parallel track or start from scratch with less features or things like that. So those are two key things that we see important for operators.
Excellent. Thank you, Antti. I'm actually going to go to Thomas now. Amit, I'll come to you in a moment. Thomas, Antti brings up an interesting point here in his comment that the specifications are there, they can get started, but it seems not. I mean, it's not like as if it's still plug and play that you can pick different vendors. I know that Intel's doing some work in CNTT, for example, and also Intel's providing some reference implementations through FlexRAN. What do you see as your role in terms of lowering those barriers, Thomas?
Yeah, I think FlexRAN and also what we are doing in CNTT is really we want to make sure that we enable and speed up as much as we can the industry, to adopt it maybe a little bit faster, helping the partners, but also the comm service provider, to get it. But as Amit said, it's on one side is also, what do the comm service provider want to do? Some of them are more in the greenfield, which is a little bit easier, to start. Some of them are in a brownfield environment, which is a bit more complicated from an integration. Some of them, they can maybe start with an O-RAN deployment more in the 5G environment, and so it's really quite a complex environment. But again, from an Intel point of view, we want to make sure you can use the same deployment strategy as much as possible and really bring the barrier down. And the other part is, of course, we want to make sure you can use the same software stack from the data center to the edge, to the far edge it comes to, that you don't have to deploy and manage multiple type of software stacks. So I think that's where we want to spend time, and also on the standardization, testing, integration piece. I think there's a lot of work to be done. We always see the nice things, cloudification, but the complexity there from an operational point of view, from an automation point of view, I think needs also to adopt. And to be fair, in the telco industry, we maybe, did a little bit miss this boat about orchestration. We speak, 8-9 years about orchestration, but, the deployment, the readiness, maturity level, maybe not yet there where it should be. And I think that takes some time.
Thank you, Thomas. I think, Amit, you are unique in some ways that you actually build solutions not only on the radio part, but also you'll have an implementation of RIC, RAN Intelligent Controller. What do you see are the barriers from your side, especially looking at those multi-generational technologies, 3G, 4G, 5G, and so on?
Yeah, definitely Open RAN is one of the disruptive solution, and we think that by now Open RAN has become mainstream. Definitely some of the barriers that we see are mainly, the confidence in the technology from some of the operators. One of the reasons for this is basically some of the FUD that some of the vendors have created about Open RAN. And secondly, being a new entrant into the market, right? Gaining trust and confidence of the operator is also something very crucial and paramount. And we have been successful to a greater extent in gaining this confidence and trust with some of the tier 1 operators. And we are building on top of it as the time passes by. And thirdly, operators, as I said, need a solution, right? Because as earlier panelists already said, that there are not many greenfield deployments that are happening. So there is a need to have a solution which can provide all the Open RAN solution, because operators are not going to have one sort of network deployed with legacy and the other, because that's not going to provide them the cost reduction and the benefits that they want, right? So that's why we as Parallel Wireless are basically, our goal is to come up with all the Open RAN solution, which will be rightly suited for all the operators in all the geographies, which will meet their current as well as their future needs.
Thank you, Amit. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but briefly, because this is, I'm from Red Hat, and we are talking about, Open 5G Con. I do have to ask this question to every panelist, right? Very briefly, the role of open source. I think some of you actually mentioned a little bit. There is something going on in ORAN SC with respect to code contribution in Open RAN space, but also there's work going on in WG6 around cloudification group. So what do you see as the role of open source in Open RAN, given this particular topic? Very briefly, if I may just sweep the board and ask all of you to just very quickly comment on this. This time I'm going to start with Antti first.
Yeah, open source comes into the picture, especially when we are talking about Cloud RAN. And even though ORAN can be deployed also with classic base stations, so still Cloud RAN architecture is something where we gain the most flexibility. And of course, whether we are talking about vRAN 1.0, vRAN 2.0, so kind of a fully cloudified or just the non-real-time parts cloudified. So there's a vast majority of the platform that is built actually on top of open source, including also the orchestration and things like that. So we do have already live Cloud RAN deployments in the field, and more interest are coming actually. So I think as such, open source is very important.
Interesting. Thank you, Antti. Actually, I'll go to Pål next on this.
I know, I agree. Open source is becoming more and more important, and we Telenor are definitely believers in open source. We have been focusing a lot on having the platform in itself to start with as open source, and moving more and more into open source in other domains as well. It would be interesting to see open source implementation of the RIC as an example, and then eventually also moving into the components, the other components as well. So yeah, indeed.
Okay. Thomas, what's your take on this? On open source? I know you've worked with a number of community players now.
Yeah, for us, open source is business critical and the key success, to be successful, to be honest with you. The thing, I think, what we see again is not only the open source, it's also that you find distributor who can help operate to leverage. I think that's something which sometimes goes forgotten, on that side. So I think open source is critical, but it has to be, commercial, or it has to be some kind of available, because not all the operators, we talk always about the top 10 operators who can do that own own thing. But a lot of them need help, and I think it's critical. But again, it has to come from that environment that's definitely critical to be successful.
Excellent. And Amit, what's your take?
Yeah, we believe that cloud native Open RAN solution is, I think, a need of the hour and a must have for operators. I think it's well known that operators' revenue is not keeping pace with the growth at which their data traffic is growing. And that is where we believe that cloud native Open RAN solution with all the different open source technologies is definitely going to address the need and basically help in increasing the profitability of the customers, right? We have seen that, I mean, with this kind of a solution, I mean, even from the economics point, I think it's going to have a huge impact for operators.
Cool. I'm going to go one last question and just a short, and I'll start this time with Dr. Lin because she didn't get to answer the last time. So one last question and very, very short, two parts. One, is the RAN stack mature? And two, is the current TCO meeting your expectations? So let me start with the two providers first. So let me start first with Dr. Lin. Dr. Lin, do you believe the RAN stack is mature? And two, is it meeting your current expectations in the context of TCO?
Okay. For one, I think the RAN stack is reasonably mature in terms of its functionality, but you also have to consider the aspect of the performance and the cost. So I think virtualized stack definitely has some room for improvement, but I believe that this will be always the case when you are comparing with a single equipment, a single nodes. That the virtualizer will have difficulty, I think, to compete against a hardware optimized, custom-made solution. But when we are talking about the pool of equipment, the pool of nodes, then there will be resource sharing opportunity. And then with virtualization, you can even cut down.
Okay, we're having audio trouble again with Dr. Lin's line. Sorry. Maybe we'll try to get her comment in towards the end. Let me move to Paul. Paul, do you believe very quickly, RAN stack, is it mature? And two, is it meeting your expectation with respect to the TCO?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit too early to tell about the TCO because it is very early on in the game, but there's definitely potential. So it's a bit difficult to comment on that right now. It is maturing, yeah. But as I tried to point out in previous comments as well, we need the interoperability on the interfaces, and we need the virtualization platform to be mature. And I believe there's some way to go, and some standards to go, and interoperability. But yeah, I mean, we do believe in virtualization of it. That's the key thing.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. I believe, Antti, you said the maturity is not there yet. So I think we heard from you there. But do you believe the economics model is actually attractive enough to overcome some of those maturity challenges? Oh, sorry, we can't hear you. Your line is on mute. Give me 1 second. Yes.
Maturity is not yet there.
Okay, go on, please.
Yeah, I believe that the maturity is not yet there, but we are off to an exciting start, and there will be more and more technologies coming to play, and different kind of combinations of technologies. So for example, RIC and so on. So we are in the early stages there. But when we think about TCO benefits, so I think we can already see that, for example, in Cloud RAN based deployments, depending, of course, on customer configuration, whether it's distributed RAN, centralized RAN, and what is the transport network, and so on, we start to see some benefits, but they are not really fast-paced, kind of immediate CapEx benefits. They are more like operational transformation, where you start to change your network operating model to a much more automated model, and that brings longer term benefits.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. Amit, what's your take? Is it mature from your point of view, and is it providing the right TCO, you think?
Yeah, from EW solution perspective, we are already deployment ready. In fact, we are in trial and deployments with almost 60 plus customers or networks worldwide. In fact, Vodafone recently had released some KPIs from their one of their Open RAN deployment, and I think those KPIs speak for themselves in terms of readiness of the solution. So I think rather than we as a vendors talking about it, I think there is a confirmation that it is coming from the tier one operator about the maturity of the solution, right?
Absolutely.
And from economics perspective, if you ask me, I think we are already getting some testimonials from our customers about 40 to 60% of overall savings in capex and opex with Open RAN solution, and this is coming directly from our customers. And if you see, this is a huge saving if you see the amount of capex and opex that happens in RAN.
Perfect. Thank you, Amit. Thomas, very quickly, I know you've been playing the role of a catalyst. What are you hearing from different people?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's this or that way. It's a really, I would say it's ready for certain customer, but it's definitely not mass ready at that moment.
Okay.
I think that's a statement.
Okay, I think that's a very qualified way of saying that.
To say it. And the other part on the TCO, I mean, there's a little bit, we have to be careful with the TCO. That's also the other thing, we see the TCO is improving over the next couple of months. Today it's maybe, there's not the big savings you maybe would expect, in general that there can be, but again, it's a little bit more tricky. But again, as Lin said, as soon as you can combine the things together with similar infrastructure, of course, your TCO or net present value will dramatically be better than traditional part. The last thing what I would like to say, it's for me, the belief is it will be not everything this way or that way. I think there's always a reason for traditional RAN, and there is a space for virtual RAN or open for virtual RAN on that side. I think we need to be a little bit more pragmatic on that. There will be not everything goes in this side and the rest disappear. Again, there will be segments or deployments which makes more sense with this kind of technology versus maybe the traditional one. But again, you will see the traditional one much longer than maybe some people think. They will completely disappear.
Thank you, Thomas. Dr. Lin, I believe you're back online, so I'll give you the last word as we end this panel. You were saying something, and sorry you got interrupted because of the bad line there.
Yeah, actually, I would just want to add that while the TCO does not have a final number yet, I think depending on specific deployment scenarios, for large carriers that have embedded system already, the kind of initial opportunity we see for the major TCO saving opportunity would be something like the indoor small cell deployment of 5G. But aside from the cost saving, I think we have to be reminded that the ORAN, the open and smartness of the future RAN, really are not just aiming at cost saving. It's also aiming at agility for fast upgrading a piece of hardware or a piece of software in a disaggregated system, as well as the ability of being highly intelligent and flexible, being able to deliver the vast array of different requirements that a different vertical industry might need. So I just want to emphasize this value in addition to just cost saving. It's also new revenue opportunities in a more efficient manner.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lin. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard from our distinguished panelists. You've heard about the maturity of the stack. You've heard about the interoperability that's necessary. You've heard about the smartness and the innovation. You've heard about the cognitive behavior. You've heard about the TCO. And you've also heard about some of the challenges and some of the things our customers and our partners are really doing in order to really enable an open radio access network and deploy that in a virtualized or in a cloud native manner. You see that this topic is near and dear. I'm sure we could have spent, hours talking about this from this panel. We really have a wide variety of opinion, and so I really want to thank all of the panelists on this call. We really appreciate your time, ladies and gentlemen, and despite the challenges that we've had on audio and some of the video setup and so on, sincerely thank you for joining us and sharing your opinion with us as we start to talk to our customers and our partners about the benefits of having open ecosystems, open, software, and open implementations. So with that theme, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.